Chapter 16. Aisha. It was a suspiciously tranquil night. Usually on evenings like this, when the Sultan had guests, the courtyard was scattered with loud and annoyingly curious nobles. Tonight, however, the area was empty, and Aisha did not hesitate to pull open her curtain. She seated herself in her window alcove, and with only a moon and stars as her audience, she put a brush to her arm and began to paint. Most travelers had pre-journey rituals. They prayed, they kissed their loved ones. Aisha had not been able to do either of those things for a long time, so instead she drew. She painted henna designs on top her scars and allowed herself the brief luxury of rumination. She let herself remember the softness of her mother's henna brush as she drew petals on her skin, recalled her sister's scolding when she didn't wait long enough for the henna to dry and accidentally smudged the ink while cooking or cleaning or digging in the fields. "I look forward to the day you learn patience," her mother often had teased her. "You will be a force to be reckoned with then." Now, as Aisha inked the tattoos across her skin, she was patient, careful. She imagined each stroke of the brush as a memory uncurling across her skin. A thread snapped and repurposed to create a new tapestry. Once filled with the determination rather than grief, she raised her arm to the moonlight and observed the painted sleeve of jagged leaves and flowers. Her mother had been right. Patience was a hard but necessary lesson. Obtaining revenge was not a sprint. It was a journey. Aisha sighed as she lowered her arm to her lap. An hour elapsed in peace, and then, as she was putting the finishing touches on her last tattoo, a knock came at her door. Aisha tensed, then relaxed when she heard Samar's voice. "Permission to come in, princess?" The title, one of the thief's many irritating nicknames for her, made her groan. "Call me princess again, and I'll stab out your eye." She reached for the feather-light shawl resting on her pillows, and carefully, avoiding the fresh henna paste on her arm, draped it over her shoulders. "What do you want?" The entrance burst open, and a rosy-cheeked man stumbled inside. In a heartbeat, Aisha was grabbed the newly sharpened shamshir off her wall and was approaching with the blade pointed at his chest. The man looked up and stared at her owlishly. Aisha stared at him in shock. "Prince Mazin?" The bumbling prince was dressed in a blue-black robe that looked sizes too big for him. His golden eyes were unfocused, and he blinked at her slowly as if coming out of a daze. Behind him, Samar inched into the room. Aisha shot him a look, but the thief just shrugged. If this was some kind of prank, she was going to kill him. "Oh," the prince said softly. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize—" He glanced around the room, and Aisha flinched as his gaze fell on her bare-bones surroundings. There was hardly anything to take in. The place was impersonal as an inn-room, with nothing but a bed, a simple table, and a chest for her clothing. The only individual touch was the sheet of henna patterns hanging on the wall. But that didn't matter. This was still her room. However, the prince had come to be here. She refused to let him stay. "Get out." The prince's eyes widened as she stepped toward him. "I'm sorry?" He fiddled nervously with a piece of jewelry on his wrist. "Please, let me explain." Aisha was feet away from him when she stopped, noticing the bracelet. The jewel-studded bangle Omar had shown her days ago when he'd come to her with the bizarre request to accompany his brother on a journey. Her eyes settled again on the prince's face. His lips were curled in an all-too-familiar smirk, and that did not belong to Prince Mazin. With an exaggerated bow, he unclasped the bangle from his arm, and between one blink and the next, he was suddenly Omar. The robe was no longer ill-fitting, and his eyes were bright with amusement. "What do you think? I make a convincing Prince Mazin, no?" Aisha returned his smile with a scowl. She had not been expecting Omar until after midnight, when his dinner was over, and she definitely hadn't been expecting him in disguise. She shoved him in the shoulder. "I should have stabbed out your eye." Samar laughed at the doorway. The big man leaned against the wall and crossed his arms over his black tunic. "If it makes you feel any better, he put on the act for all of us. Most of us were fooled." His dark eyes crinkled with a teasing smile. "Present company excluded. I thought it'd be worth losing an eye to see your reaction." Aisha pointed at the door. "I'll throw you out the window if you don't leave right now." Samar fluttered his lashes at her, touchy as always. He was reaching for the door when she noticed something on his arm, a jagged gash so colorless it looked like a crack in his skin. "What in the nine hells did you do to yourself?" When Samar only blinked at her in confusion, the prince shook his head and said, "The fool got cut up by a jinn on his way back from a hunt yesterday." Samar set a hand on the wound. "Ah, right. I killed the beast, but not before it injured me. It wasn't my most heroic moment," he smiled sheepishly. "I was actually about to re-bandage it when the prince showed up with that face. He's been a terrible distraction." Aisha looked skeptically at the wound. "You didn't mend the cut with jinn blood before it scabbed?" Samar sighed. "I'd rather not have that vile stuff in my veins, but good thing I have thick skin, sah? Helpful for our occupation." He cast a look over his shoulder as he exited the room. "Omar told me you agreed to go on his little mission. Good luck out there, little thief. We'll sing your praises when you return." He tipped his head in salute before shutting the door behind him. Aisha scoffed as she placed her samshir back on the wall beside its twin. "Sing my praises for what? I won't be doing anything but keeping a pathetic prince safe." She returned to her window alcove where her henna brush and jar still lay. She set them aside as Omar sank onto the pillows across from her. She arched a brow. "You underestimate the importance of your task. Besides, you did threaten to stab me in the throat if I recruited you in the Cade's army. I thought sending you out with my brother would be a more pleasant alternative for both of us." "You thought correctly." She rested her drying arms on her knees and turned her gaze to the view outside her window. From her tilted tower she could see the whole city, even the distant lights of the lower quarter. It was strange to think she had been living on these streets 9 years ago. It had been where she tried to pick Omar's pockets. He could have hanged her for the offense. Instead, he had named her the first of his 40 thieves. "I take it your dinner went well?" Omar shrugged. "If by well you mean exasperating, then yes." Is that not the usual experience?" "It's different for my brother. The nobles like to flatter him, thinking it'll get them closer to the Sultan. But me, the snobs are too scared to do any more than kiss my boots." Aisha caught the glimmer out of the corner of her eye, not the bangle, but the shard of silver Omar was idly turning over in his hands. She recognized his crescent earring immediately. "You forgot to give that to your brother? Isn't it an important part of the disguise?" Omar stiffened, curled his fingers over the crescent. "My likeness is more than convincing. He does not need the earring." There was a forlornness in his gaze when he spoke, a vulnerability that made Aisha uncomfortable. She forgot sometimes that his earring was the only thing he had left of his mother, that while she at least had memories of those she'd lost, the prince would never be able to recall a mother who had died bringing him into this world. "No," she said after a few moments. "I don't suppose anyone outside of Medine would think to look for it." Her eyes fell on the bangle. "That thing, on the other hand, is impossible to miss. Are you certain no one will notice it?" She didn't miss the way his shoulders sagged at the change in subject. He reached up to click the earring onto his earlobe. "Let them notice. My brother wears flashy trinkets all the time. What's one more?" Although he looked at her and there was a silent question in his eyes. "No," she said simply. "I'm not the one in disguise. I don't need any relics. It's easier to kill a jinn with your own magic, you know. I'll kill them with a blade or not at all." The thought of using relics, of using jinn magic, made her stomach turn. Self-righteous politics be damned. She wasn't killing jinn for any gods. She was killing them for revenge, and she would cut off her own hands before she won that revenge with the twisted magic that had ruined her life in the first place. Stubborn as always, he surveyed her quietly. Aisha recognized the blank look on his face. It was the expression he wore when he was sizing someone up. She crossed her arms, having second thoughts about staying behind. "Never," he smiled. "I can trust you to see this through to the end?" "Of course. You promise not to die?" She scoffed. "A thief steals lives. They do not have their life stolen from them." "Well said." Omar tucked the bangle into one of the pockets of his robe and stood. "I am afraid I must excuse myself. I have to help my brother pack before you all depart tomorrow." He paused. "Maz owes me his secrecy, but you'll help him keep character, I hope." "I'll try my best, but no promises." She rested her head against the window with a sigh. "I see why your father keeps him locked inside. He's an easy target." "Which is why I'm depending on you to protect him," he grinned. I owe you, Aisha." Aisha flapped a dismissive hand. She had never cared about earning or trading favors. Omar put a hand on his chest and bowed. "Until the morrow." After he departed, Aisha glanced down at the patchwork of scars on her arms, at the flowers she had tattooed across them like armor. She did not believe in mourning the past, but the present. That was something she could change for the better with her blade. The city was the prince's arena. Hers had always been the desert, and she was looking forward to returning to it.